We are to start now. Joey, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking your time today to join our webinar. I'm Joey Victoria Lin from Grade 6 of Montesiana School, Batam, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Miss Manira of Fairfield Bridge of Allen, Scotland, will be joining me as a facilitator, and she will help with answering participants' questions throughout the webinar. Without further ado, I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar today as we present the topic of Understanding Pandemic from the Perspective of Transdisciplinary Team, How We Organize Ourselves. In today's session, we'll be talking about the effects of the pandemic on global economy and trade. Please welcome our two wonderful panelists of the day, all the way from Scotland. Professor William Russell from University of Dundee School of Business, and Mrs. Morven Gardner, Director of Indigo Red Accounting Services. Good morning, Professor Russell and Mrs. Gardner. We're so grateful to have the both of you to share with us this topic. As everyone is aware, unfortunately, we're not allowed to go out for our occasional retail therapy, spending time alone to pamper ourselves, have a cup of coffee in our local cafes, or even travel to another country. As much as we're affected by this pandemic, I cannot imagine how this is affecting businesses as they're holding up to sustain their operations, especially big airline companies and retail shops. To find out more, I will now pass the floor to Professor William Russell. Good day, Professor. Could you please introduce yourself and educate us on how this pandemic has greatly affected the global economy?
Yes, thank you very much, Joey. I hope you can hear me. Thank you for inviting me here today. William is what my mother calls me. Bill is what everybody else calls me. So I'm very happy to go by Bill. Listen, the COVID-19 virus and the lockdown have caused major disruption to all of the businesses around the world. And we're going to just talk briefly about how that might have come about. I want to talk about three things in particular. Why is trade important? And when I say trade, that's just buying and selling things between firms or between people. We want to talk about how the impact of COVID-19 is affecting the economy right now. And then we can also think about how it's likely to affect the economy going into the future. So the first one to talk about is just about trade. Why is trade so important to the world economy? If we go forward to the next slide, thanks. And the way to talk about this is to start off and think about just one country. So call it country A. It's not a very interesting name, but it's this circle here, or this oval. And think about there being just one city in that country, so city A. And it could be a quite large city, it could be 1 million people, it could be 3 million people, or it could be quite small, 50,000 people. And think about what that means to what you do in your everyday life. So the things that you would actually use and eat would all come from city A or from nearby. And because of that, it means that if you want to have televisions and mobile phones and cars and all ranges of food, then they would all have to be produced in city A. And because there's only 1 million people there, then all of the firms which are in that town would be very small. And because they're small, they would be very high cost firms. It would cost them a lot to produce all of the output which they're making. And so the things that you would be consuming would be very expensive in that town. And even worse than that, it's probably the case that you wouldn't have all of the firms there. You wouldn't be able to have mobile phones and televisions and cars and refrigerators and all the other things, just because there wouldn't be enough firms in that town to be able to produce all of those things. So if you only had one town and you only traded within your own town, then you would end up with very few ranges of things to use, but also they would be all very expensive. So if we go to the next slide, think now of there being two cities. So you've got City A and City B, we're still in the same country, and allow there to be some trade going on between these two cities. And as soon as you do that, a number of things happen. The first thing is that you've now got a larger population. So you've got the population in City A and you've got the population in City B. And because there's a larger population, it allows some sort of specialism to go on. So City A might have the car company and City B might have the mobile phone company. So the car company in City A is now building cars for all of the population in City A and in City B. So it's a larger car company, and so it can produce cars more cheaply. And City B is doing the same for mobile phones. And so they're just trading these cars and these phones backwards and forwards between the two cities. And so what has that done? It's lowered the cost of these items, cars and mobile phones. But it's also meant that it's allowed there to be both a car company and a mobile phone company, which you might not have had if you had only one city trading amongst itself. So now keep on going in country A, and you might have 50 cities there. And one city will have a car company, another a mobile phone company, another city might have a television company, and they're all trading, and it allows everybody to have access to all of these different goods. So that sounds like a good place to start off with. If we go to the next slide, we can do another step. Now think of there being more than one country. So you've got your country and you've got another country overseas, and allow there to be trade. So that's what these arrows in the middle are doing. They're allowing there to be trade between country A and country B. So now the world's population becomes important. So if you were in country A and it was the United Kingdom, there would only be 55 million. If a country A was Australia, there'd be 26 million. If it was Japan, it would be 125 million. The United States, about 400 million. But if we think of all of the countries in the world, then there's about 7.5 billion people in the world. So now you have an enormous population, which allows you to have different companies in different countries, all producing different goods and all shifting these goods backwards and forwards between each of the countries. So the remarkable thing about that is that if you're living in country A, you might be able to have a car built in the United Kingdom, Jaguar. You might be able to use cars from France, a Peugeot, from Italy, a Fiat, Mercedes, BMW from Germany, the cars from Korea, the cars from China, the cars from Japan, and you get to choose between all of these different cars. So you can choose the one which best suits you. On top of that, or because they're servicing 7.5 billion people, these car companies are enormous. They're huge companies, and they build these cars very, very cheaply. So you get all the variety, you get all of the cars as well. So the important question really is, to start off with, is to think, how big is this trade between countries? Remembering this trade between within your own country, but there's also trade between countries. We want to know how big are these arrows in the middle between country A and country B. So if we go to the next slide.
Sorry to interrupt, Professor. I like how the diagram you have on the trading. It is simple and easy to understand. Before we move on, I would like the audience a poll question. How much do you think the world economy is? Please provide your answer in the poll now.
This is an excellent question, Joey. Thank you very much. So I have a daughter. I have a daughter who is 11 years old. I have 3 daughters, actually. I have one daughter which is 11 years old. She is very interested in this very same topic. So she's been looking at the slides and thinking about this issue as well. And while we're waiting for the poll, Joey, whereabouts are you situated? What country are you in at the moment?
I'm in Indonesia.
Ah, very nice. You might have picked from my accent that I'm actually Australian. I do live and work in the United Kingdom, but I'm Australian, so I've gone through Indonesia a number of times. Now that's an interesting results to the polls.
Yep.
I like those. So we should go forward and we can think about what the actual answer is, shall we?
Sure.
Okay, shall I keep going, Joey?
Yes.
Okay. So let's start off by just thinking about that question. How big is the size of the world economy? So the total size of the world economy in 2018, so a couple of years ago, is 85 trillion US dollars. Now, it doesn't really mean much to me what 85 trillion US dollars is. I can't think of those sorts of numbers. It's too big. So $85 trillion is the same as $85,000 billion, which is the same as $85,000 million, or $85,000 So this is a very large economy. The world economy is huge at the moment, or was in 2018, and now 2020, maybe just slightly larger again. So if we go to the next slide, the thing that we want to know is about those arrows in between the countries. So the size of the world economy, $85 trillion. The total trade between countries, this is what we call exports, the total trade between countries is $21 trillion. So that means around a quarter of the world economy, the quarter of the size of all of the businesses in the world, the quarter of the world economy is traded between countries. So that has a remarkable outcome. So you've got a quarter of the world economy, you've got a quarter of all income, as that turns out to be, a quarter of all income. So what everybody's salaries and wages and the like, a quarter of that. And also approximately 1 in 4 people in the world owe their jobs to the trade that goes on between countries. So out of every 4 people, 1 of them is going to be underpinned, their job is going to be underpinned by trade between the countries. Put it another way, if you got rid of all of the trade and say you were on a salary of £40,000 or dollars or whatever, you would probably, for the first approximation, you would have a reduction in your income down by about a quarter. So you would go down to £30,000 or you would lose £10,000. Actually, there would be a lot of other impacts as well, and so you would probably lose a lot more than that, but just as a first approximation. So let's go back to let's go to the next slide.
Wow, that's a lot of numbers. Look at point number 3, Professor, if I may ask. Does this mean the percentage of trading between countries have been decreasing since the beginning of this year?
Well, that's a good question. And the answer is yes, you're right. It has been decreasing. Trade is also an interesting idea, which has been going on for all time. If you go back 100 years, then trade between countries occurred, but not very much. So most of the increase in trade and all of the increase in our standard of living that comes from it has happened since over the last 150 years or so. So you're right, there's been a decrease in trade. So that was what's happening at the firm level. So we want to also think about, why is trade important for people? It's not just for the firms, but for people. What have we said? Well, we've said that if you have trade, then you have a wide variety of goods that you can have. So you can have a whole range of cars, you could have a whole range of foods. If you didn't have any trade and you lived in City A, then you would just have to eat what was being produced in your area. So if it was potato season, you would eat lots of potatoes. If it was asparagus season, you'd eat lots of asparagus. But with trade, you can go down to the shops and you can have 6 different types of tomatoes and different types of mangoes. There's no mangoes grown in Scotland, but we very much enjoy eating the mangoes which come from the rest of the world. So trade allows us this huge variety of goods that we can consume. The second thing is that it leads to jobs and people's incomes, so it makes you better off. And the third thing is that trade makes the companies larger. And if they're larger, they tend to make things more cheaply. And if they're cheaper, it just means that your standard of living is better as well. So trade helps everybody. It helps the people, and it helps the firms as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we should think now about what's happening in the economy at the moment. And COVID-19 has 3 really big impacts on the economy now. The first is just the illnesses to staff, and so that disrupts firms and makes it more difficult for them to continue trading. The second is that governments have come along and they've said, we want to stop the spread of COVID-19, and so they have a lockdown. And people have to work from home, if they can, like I do, or in some instances, the firm just has to close. So some restaurants have just closed. They might try to do some takeaway, but they tend to be just closed. So the lockdown actually closes businesses. The third thing is social distancing. So social distancing, which is ordered by the government, has meant that a lot of firms can't operate at all, or they have to operate very slowly. So you go to the supermarket and you have to only have a certain small number of people inside the supermarket, and everybody else has to wait outside. So it slows down the whole process. People buy less as they're going through this process. So how have these things affected the economy at the moment? And the losers are quite large. So the biggest loser is tourism. And tourism might be within your own country, or it might be across the world. But all of the social distancing and the lockdown just stops tourism pretty much straight away. And tourism is about 10% of the world economy. 1 in 10 people in the world will be somehow associated with tourism. Aviation, there's 2 parts to it. One is passengers being flown between countries, and that has collapsed to almost nothing. And the other part of aviation is traveling goods around the world, which is continuing on. And that's about 3% of the population of the world economy, so maybe 1.5% of that has been stopped. Restaurants have been closed. It's about 4% of the world economy. There's a few offsets. So the restaurants have closed, but supermarkets and fast food outlets, they've increased their production. So there's a little bit of an increase there. Takeaway food outlets have also increased their sales as well in certain circumstances. Entertainment is about 2.5% of the world economy, so it's about 2 trillion. Interestingly enough, a few little areas of entertainment. So entertainment would be pop concerts, music concerts, plays, theatres, going to the theatre, but it includes games and also online access to movies and television and things like that. So the entertainment industry, large parts of it have just had to close, but also the games industry seems to have grown. Everybody's sitting at home playing their little games and having fun has increased, and there's a lot of online entertainment, so people have signed up to get movies online as they go along. Shopping is about, well, it's nearly a third of the world economy. It's 28%. 24 trillion is on shops. Most of the shops in a lockdown, if you're in lockdown, will have closed. So that's a large reduction. There's some increase on online shopping. So if you've got an online presence, then these shops have done better in those. And then the last group, energy companies, oil companies, mining industries. Now, all of these industries are going to have reduced production because the economy is smaller, and so there's less demand for these inputs, these energies, the oil and aluminium and steel and things like that. So the losers are big and the losers are obvious as you're going through that. But if we go to the next slide, we can think about who are the gainers. There are a few people who gain by having the COVID-19. Very strange outcome. So if we move to the next slide.
Excuse me, Professor. May I
yeah.
Thank you. I have a question. From this slide,
Yes.
does this mean a lot of people are losing jobs as companies are at loss right now?
That's exactly right. There's a lot of policies being put in place so as to stop jobs from being lost. But you're absolutely right. There are very large losses of jobs and of firms as well. So firms are becoming bankrupt and jobs are being lost at the same time. We can talk a bit later on about some of the policies which governments have put in place so as to reduce the number of jobs which are lost and to help firms as well. But you're right. Overall, there are big losses in jobs in nearly every country. So if we go on and we can talk briefly about who's gained. Well, if you're in the industry which makes masks and protective gear and intensive care units, if you're in that industry, and these are very necessary products, then you've done probably quite well. If you're making soap and sanitizers, those sorts of products, then you've probably done well as well. Technology companies, cloud computing, video conferencing, what we're doing now has really come to the front. People have been using video conferencing very intensively. Telecommunications. Unfortunately, with the deaths, high number of deaths, then the funeral industry is doing well in that strange sense of the word. And then accounting firms are doing quite well because of a lot of bankruptcies and there's a lot of consulting work being done. So the real question, I get asked this quite often, people ask me, how much will the world economy shrink? How much smaller will it be in 2020 compared to last year? And that's a really difficult question to answer. And it's difficult because we don't quite know what's going to happen to the lockdown, and we don't know what's going to happen to COVID-19. Will there be another wave? Will there be, when we reduce the, ease the lockdown, will there be a COVID-19 will come back, in which case we have to go back into lockdown. However, it would be very easy, my guess, economists like to say forecast, but I would say guess. My guess is it's going to be about 10% smaller economy in 2020. Now, that's a bigger crisis than's happened at any time since the Second World War. Biggest recession since the Second World War will be due to the coronavirus. But it doesn't really matter what that number is. The 10% doesn't really mean much. What it really is telling you is that the recession will be quite large and that the impact on people's economies will be large. So if we go to the next slide, we should think a little bit about what's going to happen in the future. And the first thing that's going to happen is that the behavior of people is going to change. And it's going to change because of social distancing. It won't matter whether the government says what the social distancing is, if it's a policy. It'll just change because people will be concerned about COVID-19, and so they will want to stand further away from people. And so all of those other days when you would meet somebody and greet them by giving them a cuddle, that will all stop. Shaking hands, that will probably stop as well. It'll also mean that people will be slightly scared of going out where there's crowds, and so they will stay at home. So that means that they won't go off to the movies and restaurants as much as they did, or travel. Travel will be something which is considered as being high risk, and so people won't travel within their own towns or country, or even across countries as well. And meetings will become much more difficult to have unless you do them online like we are today. So if we then go to think about trade, thinking about how the behaviour of people has changed, well, trade's going to be affected as well, because whenever there's trade going on between countries, there's also a flow of people. So if people in China are selling goods into the United Kingdom, then people in China will come so as to be able to do that. You would come to represent your company. You would come to be able to explain what's going on. But in the other direction, if you're in the United Kingdom and you're building something that you want to sell in China, then you would also move from the United Kingdom to China. So the fact that there will be movement of people will be less means that there will be less trade as well going on between these countries. And then the third thing that we should talk about is what's going to happen, what's the legacy, what's going to happen because of the crisis that we've had. And one of the things which will change dramatically is an increase in amount of borrowing by governments and by firms and by people. So when the government is spending more money at the moment, how do they do that? Well, they borrow from the markets. They borrow from everybody so as to be able to give out funds to people who are unemployed and businesses which are in trouble. And so that builds up amount of debt. So they've got to repay that later on. And because they have to repay it later on, it means they've got less funds to be able to build things which you might like universities and roads and airports and schools and all of these things which governments spend. So governments are going to be spending less into the future on these goods. Firms, a lot of firms are struggling, and the way they're getting through it is that they're borrowing. They're borrowing from banks, they're borrowing from the government, they're borrowing from their families. And again, when the crisis is past, they will have to repay that borrowing. And so they will be having less funds, less money to be able to spend on new equipment, on new projects, on building a new car plant, and all of these things. And then finally, people who unfortunately have had a difficult time through the crisis will find that they also have a higher level of debt because they will be borrowing. They're not working, they're not getting a salary, and so they're borrowing funds to be able to get by as well. And so people will buy less going forward as well. So what that tells us is that for this period after COVID-19, while the government is repaying its debt, and firms are repaying their debt, and people are repaying their debt, it means that they're going to be all spending less going into the future. And if they're spending less going into the future, the economy will be smaller and will grow more slowly. So we can probably imagine that there will be 10 years of slow growth after this crisis. There will be a bit of a bounce back, and then there will be just slow growth going forward.
Professor?
Yes.
If you can share more, how are governments holding up if they keep on borrowing money and be in debt? How long do you think this recession is going to last?
Well, I think the really strong point, the really large part of the recession will possibly last for 1 or 2 years. Again, it matters how long will COVID be around with us. If it keeps on being with us, keeps coming back, then the recession could be quite long. But in terms of the decade, as I say, it'll be a decade of slow growth. And that affects society all around the world. If there's slow growth, then incomes aren't improving. It means that developing countries can't develop as quickly as they would otherwise. You get political unrest in some countries going forward as well. However, having said that, the world has gone through very large economic crises in the past, really huge ones. So there's a very large depression in the 1930s. More recently, in 2007, there was a big recession because of events in the finance sector. And the economy and the political systems in all of the countries handled it remarkably well. There was a little bit of turmoil, but overall it just worked itself through and the system maintained itself. And so I suspect the same thing will happen in COVID. There will be a little bit of turmoil, but the system will be able to handle it going forward. But that's a good question, Joey. So I think that's the end. I think what we can say is behavior is going to change. Because of that, the amount of trade is going to change. And because of the change and underpinning all of that, it's going to be lower spending by pretty much everybody in the economy going forward as well. So there you are, Joey. I think that's a good place for me to stop. My mother always said, when you've come to the end, you should stop talking. And my mother was very clever.
Thank you very much, Professor. It was a very interesting presentation. It seems that COVID-19 has greatly impacted the global economy, and this is very alarming. Due to the pandemic, trade was not possible as supply and demand are decreasing. As Professor Russell mentioned earlier, trade does not just occur between two countries. Trade within their own country is also affected, then affects one to sustain their living. This is indeed very scary to say the least. Let us now look into the perspective of business owners. I'm glad online shopping is made possible even though physical stores in the malls are closed. Nonetheless, business owners had to shut down their businesses and caused many people to lose their jobs. Now, let's look into another aspect. What effect do business owners experience due to the pandemic, and what will be the potential solutions? Please welcome Mrs. Morben Gardner. Dear Mrs. Gardner, could you please introduce yourself and share with us how has COVID-19 shaped the way we shop? And what can we, as consumers, do to help these businesses?
Thank you, Joey. That was a lovely introduction. I'm going to apologise in advance, everybody, if my children have just woken up. It's morning here, so I do apologise in advance if we've got little people joining us. They might learn something as well. So I have a accountancy and financial services business, and as such we've got lots and lots of clients, and as you can imagine they're in different areas of trade at the moment, and I want to discuss with you and share with you what 3 of these clients are doing just now. Now, as you can imagine, the marketplace that we're in just now, even before COVID-19, there were lots of challenges that were facing businesses. For example, there was, could we have the next slide, please? There were lots of challenges facing businesses before this, anybody knew about COVID-19. High rental costs, there was high utility costs. Everybody's bills were just getting out of control, and staff costs. So that's salaries for people working in the shops.
Wow, I'm shocked. I have never thought businesses could face these challenges. Are these only applicable to local independent shops, or it is applicable to giant businesses too, like Uniqlo and H&M? What other challenges are the businesses facing?
Well, Joey, yeah, that's a very good point. But actually, these situations, these apply to all businesses, no matter how big or small they are. And basically, how people react during lockdown is really critical. And yes, there's lots of things that us as consumers can do to help businesses. So whether it's in the form of continuing to buy, whether it's in the form of feedback. And I'm going to explain to you by going through 3 examples how people have done this. Now, one of these, and this client has done this very successfully. They've embraced this. And I'd like to introduce to you the first client. So we have here the Kippen Hotel. This is a local, recently purchased business. It's a family-run business, and it's entirely reliant on tourism. Now, obviously, they have been told they had to close. People are not allowed to come and stay at the hotel. So they have had no option, but they've got to close their business. Now, people would come and stay because of the picturesque rural village location. They're not coming on business. It's entirely based on tourism. So what we've had to do before everything COVID related, if guests came, their marketing strategy would be people would leave a review, okay, and that would encourage other people to come and stay in the hotel, okay. Now, what's now happened is they had an option that nobody was going to come and stay. So what were they going to do? They were going to have no income. They've just taken this business on. What options were available for them? So they decided to overcome these challenges and respond to basically what customers were looking for and offer a takeaway service. Now, it's a rural location, so they have a target market there. They had a really exciting opportunity. And they have reacted to this, and they've overcome a lot of challenges, and they've created a takeaway service. Now, it's not just a standard takeaway service. We've also introduced a takeaway service where they have got some fun things happening. So they'll have a virtual quiz night. So they've embraced social media, and they've got a pub quiz night where they will send out little food packages to people. They'll go and deliver them contactless, and then everybody would log in through Zoom or Facebook Live, and they'll have a pub quiz, and they'll have that while enjoying the snacks that have been provided. They've also got a cook school event. Now, what happens with this one is you'll pick your menu, and it's a different one every week, and they'll deliver all the ingredients to your door. And then at one point on a Tuesday evening at a certain time, the chef will basically run through how you make this meal, and you cook along while the chef is doing it, and your dinner is supposed to look exactly like his. Now, we've tried that ourselves, and it is really good fun. It gets the whole family involved. So this is a really, really exciting, it's a really exciting response to what people are facing just now, and they've really actively diversified their sales channel. Now, as lockdowns continued, they've actually listened to a lot of feedback that they've got from their customers. So they've listened to that. Now they've got healthy options that are now available. They've had some tasting menus that they've had available, and they've also are introducing new things every single week. So they're now they've introduced that online facility on their website as well, so that people can now book online. It was only telephone calls to begin with, but again, by customers providing feedback, they're actively adapting and diversifying what they're doing. And this has been such a clever way for them as a business, but also if you think long term, the community have entirely backed what they're doing. And for such a small, new, the people themselves behind the business, they've only literally just taken the business on in November, and now you know, they're really well known. Everybody looks forward to, you know, what's happening on a Tuesday night, what options are going to be available to us. They're now asking people to make suggestions. And basically by providing this feedback, that they're really engaging with the community and they're asking the community to support them, which is absolutely paramount to this being a success, which it has been. So yeah, so they are really adapting to what the customer has asked.
Mrs. Gardner, if I may interrupt, Kippen Hotel looks like they have been very successful in generating an income during the lockdown by completely changing and instead have been offering a takeaway food service as they can't open as a hotel. Will they therefore face any challenges when the lockdown is lifted? Is this enough for them to sustain their business?
So thank you, Joe. Yes, that's a really good point, because actually after lockdown, you know, they're going to have their hotel business back up and running. Now, tourists will start to come back, but it will be a slow and steady increase, hopefully. We're hoping that there's going to be lots of what we would call a staycation. So people are going to be holidaying within the United Kingdom. And because of the picturesque rural location, you know, there's a real hope that people are going to come and visit and come back. Now, because of this, will they have enough time to continue putting so much into their cook school and the pub quizzes? And are they going to have enough time to be able to do this? And, you know, against the amount of time and everything that it's going to need to run their hotel business. So yes, there's lots of challenges for them to now think about. And also now you can see the size of that beautiful hotel. Now there's a lot of rooms in there, but they're actually considering, do they now change this slightly and actually create a cook school within the business? So yes, but again, you know, it would be really exciting to hear what you all think. Are there any other things that they could do, you know, to continue this going forward? So it's you know, that's something that I'm really looking for you guys to give us some feedback. So yes, I'm looking forward to hearing all these questions about what you think that, you know, might be a good alternative to them continuing. So yes, we'll have a look and see if there's anything else that you all think this Kippen Hotel can do. Now, the next client that I would like to introduce to you all is Gorgie Jewellers. Now, this is entirely different clients, trying to give you some real variety on the type of businesses that are being affected here. This is a very small family-run jewellery store. Now, as you can see, it's in a row of shops, and it was always relying on people walking along and seeing what's been displayed in the window. And if people saw something, a piece of jewellery that they would like, they would then, you know, it would catch their attention. It was visual, it was face to face. So they would then pop in to the store and buy a piece of jewellery or a gift for somebody. Now, the owners of this store are slightly older, and they've always been a bit scared of social media. They've always been a bit, because they're not familiar with it. They've never had to use it. They've not had to actually embrace it. So what's happened here is they've had to close the shop. There's been no option. The business has had to close because of COVID-19. So previously, they obviously have had to think of something else that they're going to do. Now, what they have thought about doing was they've had no option, but they have had to embrace social media. Okay, so now social media for them, this is when they looked into co-branding. Now, co-branding is something where they would join up with another business.
Mrs. Gardner, if I may stop you right there, You mentioned co-branding. What does co-branding mean? Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Of course, Joey. So co-branding is, if you're familiar with different social media platforms, so if you've got on Instagram, you would get lots of different people would put a hashtag beside different other people's sites, and this is how you would get. So if, for example, this is a jewellery business, so they would co-brand with a clothing firm, and the jewellery would be worn as an accessory to an outfit. So if somebody was looking at the outfit and not even thinking about buying a piece of jewellery, they would then get the traffic, they would get the views on the jewellery site, because they're basically tagging themselves on to another site. So it's a way of co-branding, it's a way of getting a lot more views of their product. Now, this is something that is a diversification of their sales channel. So they've responded to the need to be able to trade, and they've had to diversify their sales channel, and they've had to basically embrace this so that they can get the widest platform for selling that they can in quite a short space of time, because this has all happened relatively quickly. So again, like the previous example, they really have had to set up this online selling platform. Now, that in itself has brought a lot more challenges. So when people are buying things online, they've not seen the item, so you have to take that into account. When people are passing the window shop front, they will actually see the actual item that they're looking to buy. They then enter into a contract with somebody, because they're going in, they're buying it then and there, and they'll pay for it and they'll take it home. When you're buying it on an online platform, you've not seen the item, so you really are relying on it. That in itself brings on more challenges in itself, and it's a lot of money. So people, they just need extra protection when they're paying for things online, and they have different consumer rights. So there's different challenges that they've had to look at, and they've had to embrace, and they've had to acknowledge that these things exist. Now, obviously, from a sales side of things, some people still prefer face-to-face, and it's, when the lockdown is lifted, they really will have to embrace this, and they'll have to take a view on whether actually people don't want to spend as much money on jewellery items. These are going to be luxury items. So the advice to this client is that there might be a real opportunity here to absolutely keep on with their online sales, but move into costume jewellery, or obviously that's a slightly cheaper product, and that might be something that the consumer is going to develop and really kind of look at. Second-hand marketplace as well. People, I think, have had to really look at what's important during this time, and they might just actually realise that actually second-hand marketplace is a really good option as well. And now that they've embraced their social media and they've got over the fear of using social media, a second-hand marketplace might be a very exciting opportunity for them as well. So it's so I mean, it's basically, this gives you a lot of things to think about. Are there other things other than the costume jewellery, other than the second-hand marketplace, that that you can come up with that would really help this business? I mean, as I've said to you, they've really taken this in their stride, and it's really been something that they were very against to begin with. But it's a really good example of a company just having to achieve. They've had to react to the situation they're in, and they've had to create this. So to summarise where we are with the jewellery shop, the COVID-19 absolutely has changed the way that this company will operate. Now, is there anything else that you think this jewellery shop could do other than the things that we've already introduced? So is there anything other than the online platform, the second-hand marketplace, the vintage jewellery. You know, is there anything else? So absolutely, if you could share your thoughts with me, that would be really helpful. The final example the final client that I would like to introduce you to just now is a hairdressing client. Now, at the moment, this is quite an interesting example. So yeah, this is a client who has been very successful and has 2 salons and a training academy. Now, these are very successful businesses with strong social media presence, and it's also very reliant on a loyal client base. Now, people have regular appointments, people will go regularly to the salon to get their hair trimmed. Now, I am asking all my clients just now who I'm in regular contact with, you know, now that we're getting to the end of lockdown, I keep saying to them, so what is it you're going to do after lockdown? Is it going out for a meal, or are you know, what are you wanting to do? 99% of my client base are telling me the first thing they're going to do is book a haircut. So I think Hamptons are going to be incredibly busy when they can finally open again. Now, at the moment, Hamptons, so they've actually not been doing very much at all during lockdown, because what can they do? So at the moment, they're just keeping in touch with their clients. So they've got a social media presence. They're running like an online raffle. So they would have so it's a visual raffle, and they would pick a box on social media websites, and that they're just to interact with their clients. So that's what they're doing. They might basically get a free haircut, or they might get something else. So the question really is, you know, what is there anything else? Is there anything else that you think that this client could do? Because really, because of social distancing, there is really nothing at the moment other than keeping in social media that they are doing. So what I have looked at with Hamptons, so could they have done any more here? You know, this is a really interesting one. Could they have done any more? Should they have done anything else to diversify their sales channels during lockdown? Could they respond to customer needs and trends? Now, bearing in mind what they actually do, is there any way that they could have done this? Could they have diversified what they sell during lockdown? And really, my opinion on this is something that, you know, so my opinion is, what could they have done? You know, really, what could a hairdressing salon do? Now, when they open, there's lots of things they can do, but it would be really interesting to hear if you think there's anything else online that they could potentially do just now. And you know, and it's really interesting because all the clients are really excited to hear back from you. They all know that we're talking about their individual businesses today. So for David, it's David who owns Hamptons, and he's really excited to find out, you know, what your thoughts are for when you open. So the social distancing side of things, how is that actually going to be feasible? How can he cut somebody's hair when you've got to social distance? So part of the thought process is it would be one person coming in. So one person would just basically take you through the whole experience of being in the hairdressing salon, rather than somebody meeting you, taking you to their chair, washing your hair, somebody else possibly getting you a drink. It'd be one person that would take you through the whole thing. So again, there's lots and lots of challenges here. So I think that the training school, so obviously they have the increase in opening hours, and the training school could be used. The provision of any new services, should they introduce possibly a nail bar? Should they introduce additional things on top of that? Could they use the training school that they've got? They might have to actually merge their 2 shops into one, when they first started out in business, they had just one salon, and they've obviously developed their business, and they've now got two. So some advice that we've been speaking to, because obviously we've got to put robust business plans in place for the next year. This is not a short-term fix. We have to basically put in a longer-term plan here. And this is by way of robust business plans, cash flow forecast for the next year. And one of the thoughts here that our advice to this client has been is that they might have to look at going back to having one salon, which would be their bigger salon, to reduce what we said in the very beginning, their overheads, their utility bills, in order to make the business viable to go forward, thus protecting, you know, the staff. And obviously there's going to be a lot of people who are going to lose jobs, so they have to, can they operate and keep as many staff on by increasing their opening hours and utilising this training school. So those are just a few examples of where where we are and how different businesses are facing very different challenges, and why people are having to really identify what customers are looking for just now, what the existing sales channels were and how those can be changed, and how we can actually diversify what people are offering to their clients and customers. So everybody's got different challenges, but I think ultimately the three key points that we have here are so key to all of them. And I hope that's been really clear. And as I said to you, it's going to be really exciting to revisit this. And what I've already discussed is that, it'll be really nice to, in a year from now, revisit all these clients and see exactly how they've done, how they've managed to get through this, and if their alternative sales channels that they've started using just now, they've still got these in place in a year's time. And also all the clients are really excited to hear your thoughts, and I will obviously provide all their feedback as well.
Mrs. Gardner, since you have been in this field for many years, what are the solutions to help these business owners to prevent them from shutting down their business?
So this is exactly where, we are providing these robust business plans. And whereas before a lot of my job role was paper-based and computer-based, what I'm finding just now is that, 90% of my day is spent talking to clients, talking them through scenarios, talking them through just different options, and really trying to give them the tools to see what their client base is and see what they can do, and provide advice. And remember, it's changing all the time. That we have to basically be so adaptable to change. So again, we're just responding to what the customers are needing, and it's just helping them see this. And there's a wide age of clients as well, and some people, and that's why, from your perspective, this is going to be really exciting to see from your eyes what you think these three different businesses could do as well, and really have an impact and help them in what they're facing just now. So I hope that has given you some insight into just three different businesses, and it'll be really interesting to see what your questions are.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gardner, for your presentation. Before we move on to the question and answer section, I would like to ask the audience's opinion. Do you think the way we shop has changed? How would you do your shopping after MCO? Online shopping, or going to the mall, or both? Please poll now. Interesting answers.
That is interesting, isn't it? Well, yes, absolutely. The way we shop has changed, and I think that's very evident in the examples I've given you. And afterwards, it's going to be interesting, and I think that will identify the split. So people have acknowledged, as the jewellery store example, that they will have to do both, and that's really interesting that 45% of you think that is what you would do. So that's a very interesting reaction. Thank you, Joey.
After listening to Mrs. Gardner's presentation, I can agree that the use of social media is one of the greatest platforms to expand a business's marketing. I believe that social media plays a huge role in everyone's life nowadays. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all of these can be used to spread words of one's businesses. Especially now that we're in lockdown, I'm sure we spend more time on our phones scrolling our social media to curb this boredom. Nonetheless, as much as businesses could use these platforms, it is probably not enough for business owners to generate their incomes because goods and services are not sold. Now, let's move on to Q&A session. So, the first question is, which countries are mainly struggling in this lockdown? By Shaila from Fairview, Kuala Lumpur. Would you mind answering this question, Professor?
I will if I could unmute my microphone. Yes, sure. Yes, you can think of this on many different levels. I think the two important ones, the first one is that countries which are less developed have less resources. And so they have less resources to run their hospital systems and to put in place policies which will stop the COVID virus from spreading and the impact of the COVID virus. So the highly developed countries which have very developed hospital systems, they will be relatively better off going forward. COVID-19 is hitting every country in much the same way. So it's not just particular countries which will be hit by COVID-19. The second thing is to think about what I was saying about debt. Countries which start with very high levels of debt will find this very difficult, because to be able to put in place support of firms and businesses, the government is going to need to take on even more debt to be able to support the firms. And if you've already started with very high levels of debt, or you're a country which can't borrow a lot of funds from around the world, so if you're a developing country in Africa and you find it difficult to borrow, then that's going to be very difficult for those. But again, the more developed countries have a system of being able to borrow quite large amounts of funds for governments to be able to act. So yes, if you're in a less developed country, then that will be more difficult, but not completely difficult. There are methods to support these countries as well.
Thank you. Our next question is, how does the government help to sustain the work of local businesses? By Rajeswari from Fairview, Kuala Lumpur. Would you mind answering this question too, Professor?
Yes, that's an interesting question as well. It's slightly different in different countries. The mechanism is different, but in most countries they're doing it in three ways. The first way is that they are providing funds to families. So these are through unemployment benefits or just transfers. The United States has provided transfers of quite large amounts of money to all citizens. And if you support the families, then they can continue to purchase goods, and therefore that will be supporting businesses as well. They have also subsidized or paid for some of the workers of firms not fully paid for them, but up to certain amounts. And that amount of payment for workers to keep them either working or to be off on what we might call furloughs or a short holiday, that's being paid for by governments as well, so that firms, when they come out of COVID, will still have their staff. They won't have to hire new staff and train them. They will still have their staff going forward. And then the last thing is to be able to provide loans to firms going forward. Now, the loans are either provided by the government themselves or they will support banks so as to be able to provide the loans. So those are the three major areas that businesses are being supported going forward by governments. Mrs. Gardner, would you think of some other areas which firms could be supported by the government or are being supported by the government?
So there's, I've recently been doing a lot of applications for all these loans. So obviously you've spoken about the furlough scheme for payroll. So that's obviously meaning that the government are in effect taking over paying all the employees. The loans, there's lots of Scottish enterprise grants being introduced. So if you have a premises in the United Kingdom, you're being given an amount of money as a grant. So if you are paying no rates at all, no business rates, which obviously lots of businesses are in that position, they're getting £10,000 given to them. If you're a larger business and you're paying rates, you'll get a £25,000 grant. And you have no rates to pay either. There's lots of, so your government taxes, your VAT doesn't have to be paid just now. PYE payments don't have to be paid just now. There's lots of payment holidays on government taxes as well. So there's lots of things that, you know, people are introducing at the moment. So and there's also Scottish enterprise grants that we've just recently, we've actually had to close. 825 million was just introduced by Scottish Enterprise. Now this figure, they actually have had to close, last night they closed down the application forms for this funding. So lots of things have been introduced and it changes all the time. New things are being introduced all the time. So yes, there's lots of things that are happening.
Back to you, Joey.
Oh.
Have we lost Joey? She's the most important person here, I think.
But I think she got disconnected for a second, and I just saw her back, so I think she'll be online in a few seconds. All right,
excellent.
She is. Yeah.
Welcome back, Joey. You're doing well. Would you like to keep going, Joey, with the next question?
Hi, Joey. Can you hear us? Your line is cutting off. Can you hear us, Joey? Joey, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Hi, Joey.
Would you like me to answer this question?
Yeah, I'll be quickly going forward. Ms. Munira, can you proceed with the next few questions? Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. So the question that we see here on the screen, can you hear me all? Yes. So we're looking into which type of business has the most difficult work affected during lockdown. This is from Rico, FIS Subanjaya. And this question is for Mrs. Morvin.
So, I think they would all say that they've been affected, equally. I mean, it's a difficult one to say who has had who's been most affected. Obviously, people who are in close contact are, hairdressing, salons, the beauty industry, tourism, people who are in close contact. These are the businesses that really have had the most impact. Obviously, as Bill quite rightly mentioned earlier, there's lots of businesses who have developed, if you're making face masks, sanitizers, online portals, then you're doing absolutely fine. But businesses who are in close contact with people who have basically had to shut, and also for people who haven't embraced social media, like our example of the jewellery shop, I mean, that would have been really badly affected had they not embraced social media. And Hampton's hairdressing. So they, again, it's a hairdressing salon. They've obviously been affected as well. So the construction industries have been affected. It's a really, I think lots of people have been affected, but if they've embraced the changes, then they will have considered a workaround and have basically introduced new sales channels to basically get themselves through this period of time.
Thank you so much for your answer. Shall we try another one? Joy, are you back? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for your response. We have a few more questions from the audience. Wong Taka Hero from Fairview Ipoh is asking, how are we going to settle the problem of company failure during the pandemic? Do you want to answer this, Professor?
I can. So in any crisis where there is company failure, there is a mechanism in all countries about how to deal with bankruptcies going forward and restructuring of companies. Companies which get into financial difficulties don't always close. They are sometimes just reorganized and relaunched in a different form, either smaller or taken over by other companies. Mrs. Gardner, would you like to talk more about it on an exact level of company distress?
So the systems that have been put in place, all the funding that we just spoke about, that's been put in place to basically try and stop company failure. And the very large amounts of money that have been introduced by the government here in the UK, I mean, that's also the levels. I mean, we've spoken to some quite high up individuals in the revenue department, and the reason that they've capped it at 80% of people's incomes, capped at a certain amount of money, is to really kickstart the economy as well. So it seems a lot of money that people are being given, but this has very much been given to people to kickstart the economy as well. So hopefully what's going to happen is people have had this time, they're not going to notice that they've had too short fall in their income, and that actually they're going to have some money that they can now kickstart the economy by starting to buy things. So this is why all these amounts of money have been paid. So hopefully we're not going to have too much failure. There will obviously be failure. There will absolutely be people that are going to fail during this, but the rescue packages and what's been put in place just now has really gone so far to help people. I mean, I've got some clients who really, would not be trading now, would not even have considered continuing their business to get through this 8-week period if this funding had not been there. So it does work. It really is working. And we really have to stick to these robust plans as well that we have in place for them all, because this is not just an 8-week. This is not just an 8-week problem. This is going to be for the next 1 to 2 years. People are going to have to be really, really strict about sticking to their cash flows and getting through this.
Thank you very much for your response. Finally, last question. How will the businesses recover back now when the economy is bad? This question is from Kimberly, Fairview, Penang campus. Would any of you will answer this?
Mrs. Gardner, would you like to go first?
So absolutely, thank you. So businesses will recover by learning from what they've just been through, by acknowledging the new normal that we're all looking at. So basically, businesses are going to recover, and they will have had to embrace the situation that we've all been in, and they will have learned, they've diversified their sales channels, and they will have obviously moved into a new platform for whatever it is, whether it's a selling, whether it's a consulting, whether it's and the use of the internet, the use of social media, the use of these platforms is absolutely paramount for that.
I could add a couple of things to it, which is just saying that businesses will recover. I mean, that's just the nature of when we go through a crisis. Economy be bad, I'm not sure quite what that means, but if you mean that it's going to grow more slowly, then yes, I think that's the case. After the 2007 financial crisis, it took 5-6 years for the world economy to really get back into its normal growth pattern. My guess is that it'll probably take 5 to 10 years for this one as well. But all of that really depends on what happens to COVID-19. If COVID-19 rolls on and there's no real solution to it, then it's just going to change the way we do business for many years going forward. But if it passes very quickly, then the economy will bounce back much more quickly.
Thank you so much to both Professor Russell and Mrs. Gardner for being with us today and sharing with us your insight on the topic. Today, we have looked at the PYP transdisciplinary theme, how we organize ourselves. We looked into the impacts of pandemic on the global economy and how it is affecting small and large businesses. It is important for us to understand how the economy works and how we can adapt to such circumstances in a current situation and look into the future to see what changes we might expect in economics and trading. COVID-19 has pushed the pause button on the biggest economic powerhouse. The supply chain is going to have massive disruption. It caused an economic blip, especially for China and its neighbors. To help prevent the spreading of the virus, where it started off in Wuhan, China has sealed off, and also most of the province factory shuts down. The positive takeaways for businesses from this pandemic are online platforms such as Zoom, Google Meet, and other online sources has risen by around 50% as a lot of schools are forced to close and the beginning of an e-learning era rises. Hey, look at us! Even this webinar is done through Zoom. Additionally, the demand for TV shows such as Netflix, Apple TV, Disney, and more have also increased as people are looking at other channels to watch when they spend time at home. Local groceries are also greatly impacted because it is a necessity for us to stock up our pantry as we are forced to cook. Nonetheless, food and beverage outlets have switched into using online apps to run their business just to sustain their workers' incomes. And that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Dear all, thank you for taking your time of the day to join us. Special thanks to Professor Russell and Mrs. Garner. Until next time, this is your moderator, Joy Victoria Lynn, signing off. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joey.
Bye.
Thank you, Joey.
Thank you for coming.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much, Joey. You were excellent.
Goodbye, Professor. Goodbye, Mrs. Morvin. Have a good day.
Thank you. Looking forward to kind of going through all these and getting some updates for all my clients there. Yeah, and then I will provide you with some feedback because they're very interested in what the children have to say from their perspective, because it does give them it gives them that view. I mean, it's their world that's going to be affected, isn't it? So it's going to be an interesting one.
That's true. Yes, you can see in the chat they had a lot of suggestions.
But I really struggle with trying to concentrate on what I'm trying to say and to answer questions in the chat as well. So yeah, so no, it's really been interesting. Yes.
Thank you so much. I will compile the messages for you as well, and we will have some post webinar session with the students. But probably we can re-ask them again what they think about the business, and they can be able to give a more comprehensive answer. We will share those slides to you.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. And as I said to Michelle, I will also take that to the clients and I'll give you their feedback, and whether that be try and get little videos from the individual clients that I've discussed today, so that you can obviously, if you feel it's appropriate, share that with the children who've asked questions, because I think it will make it obviously see that their opinion has counted.
Yep. Thank you so much. I think that would be great. We will compile everything, and then we'll share with you as well. I think I believe the students have some interesting response, and I did manage to read some just now as well. But thank you so much for your time and for being here, and so early in the morning. And thank you again. All right, good day, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.